Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk with a leadership expert. Richard Medcalf is a executive coach and leadership consultant to exceptional founders and CEOs and their leadership teams. Now, I get a lot of requests from leadership consultants to be on this show. And the reason why I picked Richard was because he works with some top, billionaire CEOs of billion-dollar companies and so forth. So his experience, not only has he risen to success in leadership, but he has a tremendous amount of experience in working with CEOs at the highest level. And so we're going to talk about what it takes to multiply your impact as a leader and be effective leader. And I'm really excited to have him here. Richard, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Hi, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here. I love your show and I love everything that you stand for. So thank you for having me here.
Oh, well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And you, as a fellow podcaster, we should do a shout out for that. Impact Multiplier CEO podcast is Richard's podcast. So check that out. It's a great compliment coming from another podcaster. Thank you very much. So, and I'm so jealous. You live near Paris, France, and enjoy, I'm sure, all the amazing food there. So
we do when we're not locked down and everything else.
true,
Yes. So
true, yes.
I used to remember restaurants. Yeah, that's kind of a vague memory now, but they'll come back, and we're doing our best to survive in the meantime.
And the French will do it up well. I know that for sure. So yeah.
Sure.
When they open up finally, they'll be celebrating. So awesome. Well, so let's talk a little bit more. I mentioned that you're a leadership consultant, that you've rose through the ranks, even yourself. I know as a young leader. So tell us a little bit more about you in that journey to becoming a leadership expert.
Sure. Yeah. So I always say, stop me, Nicole, if I ramble on, because talking about myself is obviously my favorite subject.
As it is everyone's.
Exactly. But I mean, in a nutshell, so yeah, I'm an Englishman now living in France for 20 years. I studied at Oxford, got a master's there, and went into strategy consulting. And it was a bit random, to be honest. I don't need to bore you with exactly how it happened, but I found it a pretty good fit for me in many ways. I think I have a natural strategist brain. It's just the way I think. And so the long and the short of it was, I was working in strategy consulting in tech for a lot of tech-based companies, telecoms firms, media firms. That went very well. I became a partner in that company, and we can perhaps go back as to some of how perhaps I rose up quite so fast in that enterprise. I then was headhunted by Cisco, so I decided it was a great moment. I just become a partner, been there about a year, and I was a very big fish. It felt like in a small pond. It was a few hundred people, kind of boutique consultancy. So I went to Cisco and became obviously a much smaller fish in a very big pond. Did various things there. Perhaps the most interesting thing at the end was a really part of a very small team of about 12 of us, set up by the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers, and the global head of sales, Chuck Robbins, who now himself is the CEO. And what John and Chuck wanted was a small team of kind of senior people who could go in at board level and really catalyze new strategic relationships and business initiatives between Cisco and some of its large tech and telecoms partners to do things that weren't currently happening, new innovations, new business models. And so this was really an example of having to kind of lead and influence where you didn't have hierarchical responsibility, right? In fact, it might even have been a different company. And there was some executive agreement, rashly made in some kind of one-to-one meeting between the CEOs. And then everybody else was told, like, figure out, we were kind of asked, figure out what we can do with this and what we can make real. And I think it's at that point that for me, a lot of things crystallized. I'd done tons of strategy reports, in my life, but what I used to really frustrate me was strategy that sits on the shelf, and never really happens. And this journey of kind of working across these complex companies and making things happen there, really reinforced this idea that actually, what really matters is, it's not the strategy, right? It's alignment and it's commitment. And it's people wanting to do it. And so the long and the short of it was that after a couple of years of that, I realized that actually I didn't want my epitaph to read, if you like. I didn't want to tell my grandchildren in many years to come on my knee, when I'm 90 or whatever. I didn't want to tell them when they asked me what I did. that I just helped increase AT&T's EBITDA margin by 0.1% or something, right? There's nothing wrong with financial results. It's great. I love doing it. I'm quite results focused person. I love metrics and numbers, and all that stuff is great. But I think I realized at a deeper level, what I wanted to do was to make a difference with people, and as it links to people and results. So I believe that when you're a high performer, you're flying at a high level. Most people think that's super impressive, but internally it feels just like it's what I do. It doesn't feel that special. It's just what I do. And for those people who are like that, they know that there's another level available to them. They know that then they're still perhaps playing small compared with what they could do. And yeah, it's quite a challenge, right? To reinvent, to re-engineer a machine that's got you to a certain altitude. And so what I love to do is work with often tech and digital sector chief executives, or sometimes other people on the executive team, and then often with their teams, to really help them reimagine their next level of impact. What's it going to take to move from where they are now to a whole new level? And I love doing that one-to-one. And then with teams, I think that the magic is often in helping teams of high performers become a high-performing team. Normally, especially at the executive level, you've got everyone who's great in their functional leadership, but don't necessarily come together as a team. So that's kind of in a nutshell my journey, and I could probably bore you to death, but those are kind of the main phases, I suppose, from kind of going from this very analytical strategy consulting background to then basically weaving in over the time these kind of leadership and influencing elements to it. So I describe what I do really is strategy, leadership, and purpose. Draw a Venn diagram and put an X in the middle. And that's what I love to focus on.
I love it. That is great. Well, and as much as there's a lot of talk about it, like you said, strategy is not something new to the leadership conversation. However, a lot of times strategy doesn't get executed. And if it doesn't get executed, what's the point? And so when you talk about alignment, that's really important for people to be aligned and feel like they're part of that and they understand their part and what it means to them. So that is really important to do it, and to do it well. You can create a strategy, and anybody, I should say, I don't say anybody, but you can do that, but it's what happens after you get it done that makes all the difference.
Yeah, people think that it's all about strategy and execution, but I say it's actually about alignment and leadership.
Yes.
It's because you can have a strategy, but if people aren't aligned around it, it doesn't matter.
That's
and
right.
Execution, again, it's like, well, the way you actually create execution is by mobilizing people, actually
Yes.
having people committed to a goal.
Yeah, and if you want their heart in it, if you want their passion, their whole being to show up in making that happen, rather than them mechanically just executing on somebody else's idea, there's a big difference. I remember one of the guests I had on the show, Robert Nuremberg. He is he has his organization's called the Music Paradigm, and so he fell into this by accident, but started working with leaders and showing them, because he was a symphony orchestra leader, and so he fell into this by accident. But what he would do is he would actually show leaders the difference between the results they're getting and the results they want using music. And it's such a stark difference, like what you're talking about here. And then of course he doesn't really do the follow through on that. Like he just shows them and starts and kind of introduces them, makes them aware of it, and then they can go from there. But that's where somebody like you says, hey, this is what good looks like. This is what great looks like. So yeah, might get them to execute, but when you get their heart and their alignment into it, it's a whole different, it sounds a whole lot different. The results, the impact is a whole lot different. So talk about your rise to success yourself as a leader. You mentioned about how quickly you rose through the ranks. What was the impetus for that? What did you do differently that somebody else who maybe has the same kind of pedigree and expertise or whatever just didn't do the same the same thing.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about that. And I mean, and I want to say as well, there's plenty of things I got wrong and did wrong, right? And I would do
We'll talk about
differently.
that too.
We can talk
Yes.
about that. But I think what really worked for me, and it's been a recent insight for me thinking back. Um, I think it was really investing. And what I mean by that is um, freeing up time to make things better. So investing now to make things better next week, next month, next year. And actually, for me, this is the heart of strategy. So when I say I have a strategic brain, I think actually a lot of it is figuring out like what's the thing to do now that's going to have the biggest return, right? And it's focusing in on that. So let me give you an example. So I was in consulting, fairly typically it was strategy consulting, it's about building Excel models and business plans and this kind of thing, doing research or whatever. But we're a pretty analytical firm. So a lot of what we were doing was trying to build business plans for investments and deals and regulation and various things. So looking back, whilst my colleagues would take a blank piece of Excel or they'd perhaps hack a previous model and they'd build things, I would do things like I would design a template that had kind of all these flexible components in so that I could go in and configure a few things, copy and paste a few blocks around, and it would suddenly magically generate all my results, all my graphs, all my financial outputs. So that task of building that template required some late nights and if that's working at the weekend or whatever, or doing it in other times when I could have been doing other more directly productive work. But the result was, of course, then I was able to knock out models that were taking my compatriots a couple of days. It might take me a couple of hours because I'd done the upfront work. I remember building a toolbar, Excel macros back in the day, very early in my career. I had no idea how Excel macros worked. I was really hacking it with some internet searches. But I built a toolbar that allowed me to format my models really quick, with just like 2 keystrokes, and things would be beautifully formatted and everything else. Or would implement little predefined blocks. It sounds very geeky, but again, the point was once I built that, I was able to fly across my models and do all the things that everybody else was having to go and do manually in multiple steps. Because I'd identify that's something I'm doing repetitively. I better damn well make sure that is super smooth because I'm doing it all the time. And so it's what I call the $100 hammer principle. This was introduced to me by a colleague at Cisco who said, Richard, he said to me, I only do DIY, home improvement once a year. So I buy a $2 hammer from whatever the local hardware store. And if it falls apart on the 4th bash, it doesn't really matter because I'll buy another one next year when I need one. But if I was a carpenter, I would go and buy the $100 or $150 reinforced hammer, with shock absorber to protect my elbow, and it would be super powerful. And I'd buy one and it would last me forever, right? Because it's a tool of my trade. And so his conclusion was, so I buy my double monitor setup, for my computer, and I invest in that, I renew my phone as often as possible because these are the tools of my trade as a knowledge worker, And so I think that idea of saying, what are the key areas where some investment will lead to everything being easier from now on?
Yes.
And so that's like a principle which, when I look back, I do that all the time. And like in any one moment, it looks like, Richard, why are you spending your time doing that? It doesn't seem that important. You could just do that job. It would take you much quicker than building that template. You could just do the model. Yes, but I've now got an asset that's going to pay me dividends. And when I look at where I work with leaders, I'm often encouraging them again to look at, like, are you spending your time in what I call OPEX activity? Are you spending time just keeping things going, right? Just keeping things doing, but actually you're going to have to do pretty much the same thing next quarter, or next month, or next week, or you're going to have to do the same task on the next project or with the next customer. So this is things where you're basically on a hamster wheel, you're repeating it. So I'm encouraging people to say, well, what would be the strategic project, which for me is what's the investment. For me, strategy is not about stuff 10 years in the future necessarily. It can be very much, what is the thing I can do here? Where can I invest now so that next week and next month is so much better, is easier.
Yeah.
I don't have to have my time in. And that freeing up of margin that you can reinvest is super powerful. So back to my little story of of my modeling, right? Excel, 20 years ago, whatever it was. Because I didn't have to spend time building the models, I could spend time presenting them and drawing out insights. So that rose my level, because suddenly Richard was no longer just the modeler, he was the guy talking about the results of the model. Or he was the guy who was able to work on a proposal and write himself in as the project manager or whatever, and therefore perhaps take roles that were more senior than other people were doing at the time, because I'd created this extra margin. And I think that same principle applies no matter what level you are. If you're the CEO, there's still things, there's still plenty of demands on your time which are not the strategic use. And I just love helping people focus in on those and repurpose them.
Well, you're talking my game, because I love systems. And back in the day, 20, 30 years ago as well, when computers became a thing, and we started to integrate them, because pre-computers, at least for the small business that we had, and the businesses my parents had, it was all manual, even just tracking. And I remember thinking, well, this is stupid. Like, why are we doing this? So, the same thing over and over again, and it's taking a certain amount of time. How can we shorten the time? And so to me, I've always said I'm a systems person, but a systems in terms of building these types of models. So if I step back and I create at that time, a DBase or some type of database, Paradox, and I played with all those different ones to be able to create something where we could track all this information, where I put the information in once and I could keep doing the reports on it, rather than having to figure that out every single time, and how much more efficient that was. And then going and repeating that with different, people started asking me to come in and do that, look at their systems and so forth, and to be able to get done a lot more in less time, so that you can, like you said, you can go and focus on other things. And isn't that what leadership is all about? So we're talking really, it's about having the vision, not just the vision for how much you can grow, but the vision for effectiveness, and not just how much can you cram into a day, which I think a lot of times people are doing. It's like, how can I do more with less? Well, I can run faster, I can work harder, I can get more people on this project. Well, yeah, but what if you actually, just like what you're doing is, stepping back and saying, hey, well, what if you actually created a template? What if you create a model, and then from there you would actually be able to do a whole lot more with less? Yeah.
And this is so this is where the leadership and strategy domains intersect. So what I love helping people do is actually looking at that for their organization, right? So like, what is the environment that I need to create for my team, so that it makes everything easier, right? What is the language I need to seed into my organization to scale certain ways of doing things, certain mindsets across the organization? These are the kind of really kind of important things. Obviously, when you're at the CEO level, it's not necessarily going to be about optimizing your spreadsheet, right? But it's about how do I create this leverage in an organization, right? And in a team. How do I raise the boat, not just for me, but for everybody?
Well, and how do you create a culture which encourages people to optimize their spreadsheet, if that's what it takes? And if they happen to see the people on the front lines, let's say, and they happen to see a way that you can be more, that they can be more efficient, which makes the organization, and duplicate that over however many people are doing that same job. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of genius, a lot of innovation that is being missed, because the culture of the organization doesn't allow for it, because it's really about churn, right? It's about get your work done. Don't step back and do that. Like, we just need to get the job done. Just do your
Mm,
job. I don't know how many times I've heard, and I work with the smaller business owners and so forth, but I've heard them say things like, why don't they just do their job? If they would just do what they're supposed to do. And yeah, that's fine. But then what you're actually asking, it's like for a robot, you're asking for somebody just to show up,
mm,
execute, and move
yeah.
on. But when you have these people that are coming and they're coming with their different perspectives, talk about diversity. And so, they're coming with unique experiences and perspectives, and they're looking at it and they may say, hey, if we actually did this, this would be a lot more efficient.
Right.
And how that could improve and what that could mean to the bottom line is huge. So it's
Yeah.
creating that culture that this is actually that they invite this into their organization.
Mm.
That's a
Yeah.
huge multiplier.
Yeah. So imagine if everybody in the organization had one improvement project that they were running. It doesn't have to be big, right? It can be something they can deliver in a week or
Yeah.
a month or even a day. It doesn't matter. But if everybody's working on something which is going to make their life easier in the future,
Yes.
then you create this flywheel, right? You're out of the hamster
Yes.
wheel.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. I love this. So let's talk about your leadership mistakes. Because like you said,
Yeah.
you rose through the ranks quickly, and we
Mm.
talk about some of your strengths, but you also mentioned that you made mistakes along the way. So for everyone
Yeah.
to, of course, you're very brilliant, and there's no doubt about that. But we want to give some people some encouragement as well
Um,
along their leadership journey. So
no,
yeah.
yeah, of course. No, I mean, I think moving into Cisco, which was this huge company, tens of thousands of people, right? From a, you know, 300-person company, was a bit of a culture shock. And um, it was fantastic. And, I had a good career at Cisco and so forth. But I think when I look back, um, I think I didn't define when I came in, actually. I don't think I didn't define my next level. Okay, actually, at that point, I think I came in, I was like, this is great. This is a new role. This is pretty exciting. It's all different. And I think I left it a bit too late to really kind of define my next level, as to say, like, I've come in with this strength, this stuff I can know how to do. I can impress people. And had a good impact. And um, again, I invested some time building out some thought leadership, which really served me and got me kind of known and things. So that was all good. But I think I didn't take quite enough time on thinking through what's going to be amazing for me. What kind of impact could I really have in this company in the next
Mm.
3 years or whatever. There might be reasons for that. My kids have just been born and there's lots of stuff going on. So perhaps it was just a phase of life. But looking back, like, that could have been a missed opportunity. And I think as well around stakeholders, right? Because I'm a pretty task-focused person at some level. I mean, I love people, and obviously my coaching business is all about people. But there's this kind of strategic, task-focused nature of me. Yeah, and I see this in a lot of people when you've got jobs to do and deliverables to make. It can be easy not to really invest in building relationships beyond the immediate transactional
Yes.
projects that you're working on. And I think that was probably a bit of a weakness for a period, that I
Mm.
wasn't really thinking about, who can I serve in this company over and above my immediate workload. And I
So
think
when did
that,
that awareness come in where you realized that, like, for example, relationships were important? Was there a point where something like that transformation moment, if you will, or that defining moment where you're like, "Ooh, I got to do things a little bit differently," or was it looking back, like what you're doing now, is looking back and thinking on
I
how
mean,
you could have done it better?
I think there's a mix. There's a mix. Um, I think well, I mean, there was, I think a lot of it in a sense has been looking back, just realizing, oh, these were things that perhaps I could have done differently, or had a um, perhaps done, had a bigger impact, even within that role. I mean, I did what I did, and I really enjoyed it, and it was senior stuff and everything else. But I think in terms, Cisco's such a big organization, right? So in a sense, you can play all these different games, right? So I suppose I wasn't, I I wasn't on the executive team of Cisco, right? I wasn't, whatever. And perhaps I didn't want to be that either. But I think when I looked at some other colleagues who really had built out a really good set of stakeholders and people that they could work with, I think I realized there that, yeah, these people have got something that perhaps I've missed. And I did build that, but a bit later
But
on.
later
So
on, yeah.
I think there was a bit of a dip in that kind of in my progression, I would say. But there's also a key moment, I think, around this importance of relationships, and works in both ways. So I was in Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport on one Sunday. I had to fly to San Jose, San Francisco, flight on Sunday afternoon before meeting on the Monday, and I was there, and I was flying in economy class, as Cisco liked to make everyone do. But then there was like the 2 levels above me, kind of SVP of the business unit, who suddenly I noticed was in the queue next to me in business class, right? And we were all kind of shuffling along, and we kind of passed each other. And he'd literally just integrated our business unit into his business unit. So he didn't really know many people, in our organization, but he knew my boss because my boss now reported to him. So I said hello to him. I said, "Oh, just thought I'd say hello because I'm now in your organization. So you must be heading off to the headquarters as well." And really interesting because he kind of gave me about 5 seconds of attention, and then said, "Oh, look, the queue's moving, the line's moving. So see you." Bye. And like that, but then like took one step forward and then the line stopped. And so there we were, hardly any distance apart. And this leader didn't, he just didn't take the moment to build a relationship with somebody in his organization, in his team. He didn't take even 1 minute to kind of just ask me, find out about who's this person. Is this a good high performer? Is this somebody I should be sacking? He had no idea. He had a little moment to find out and perhaps to win somebody over to his new business unit.
Yes.
Or not. And he totally missed it. So I ended up getting on the plane thinking, well, what a jerk, I mean, and that was it. My heart was, I was no longer going to work for this guy. It was that bad. And I realized it as well that, but part of me, I was thinking, yeah, have I ever been that jerk, right? Have I ever, I haven't done that exact same thing, but what would it, where have been the times where I've failed just to notice the people because I've been so focused on my own agenda, my own projects, my own goals, everything else. Again, it's not my values. I don't want to do that, but that's what kind of came for me. It was like, okay, this guy, he's totally lost me. And therefore it's so important, right? And you can have the best strategy, and he had a big strategy, and he had, he was seen as potentially a successor to John Chambers as the CEO role. He didn't get that role, this individual, but he was seen as a potential successor. And I think that, to be honest, the person, John, Chuck, who got it, he created incredible loyalty with his people. And so for me, that was another defining moment, actually, of going, people are the engine of your success at whatever level. So invest in them.
Well, it was a great lesson in there about, as an example of like, how do you perceive it on your end? Sometimes we learn leadership not by just seeing great leaders, but by seeing the void of great leaders and leadership. And I know that for myself too. I think of one of the best teachers of leadership was actually someone who was a horrible leader. And I just learned in that how it was translated, how it felt, and the impact of working with her, the impact that it had on others. So some of her good qualities, of course, she had good qualities. And then there was some not so good qualities, and realizing and saying, well, mental note to self, don't do that. Because I don't ever want to be that. And so very powerful. And you talk about relationships, I'm a very, like you, very task driven person, but even in, you know, an organization like Cisco or any organization, yeah, you need to get the tasks done. But who gets the tasks done? People. And
Absolutely.
if their heart's not there, then it's going to be a lot harder to get them engaged, fully engaged in getting it done, like you said. And they missed a huge opportunity. That little 1 minute, you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
opportunity with you. You never know where your career might have changed and solidified based on that in that organization. So
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's, for me, this one of my little frameworks, you heard it in the podcast, is called the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. And for me, this idea of multiplying your impact, it always comes from addressing the limiting factor.
yes,
Okay. So there's no point working on the wrong thing. And I see this especially with teams. It works for individuals, but especially for teams, because the number of times teams will say, oh, we have a relationship issue. We all need to look at each other's personalities and understand that. Okay. Now, sometimes that is exactly the right thing to do with the team. Don't get me wrong, right?
yeah,
But imagine that you have a team who is failing to engage properly with their stakeholders, and so as a result, they've got far too high expectations placed upon them with far too little resources. So they're totally incapable of pleasing their stakeholders.
yes.
Okay, and therefore everyone's under pressure and stressed out, and they're rubbing up against each other, and they're creating friction. And so what looks like a relationship problem is actually a stakeholder management problem. And so I love it when I can help teams go actually, the problem is not where you think it is, it's actually over here. When you address that, then actually the relationships will sort themselves back out,
Yeah.
in that example. And
Yes.
and again, on a leadership, personal level, it's like, what is the limiting factor? Is it is it commitment? Is it energy? Is it collaboration, right? And being able to mobilize other people and bringing them on with you, right? Is it actually insight? I mean, what is it that's holding you back at this moment, or holding your team back? And
And
I
do you
think,
notice that
again,
it comes from the leader themselves when you're asking these questions
mm,
about impact? Are they asking themselves if I'm not bringing this to the table, or is it that they're asking that their organization doesn't have it to be able to find where those limiters are, or is it
well,
both?
yeah, I mean, generally say there's three levels, right? There's you, there's your team, and there's your organization. Um, I think you can look at it at each level, right? So where's the limiting factor in all of those?
Mhm.
Um, my general approach to organizational transformation is that you can't transform an organization until you have a team that you can then multiply the dynamics
Yes.
of across an organization. So if the leadership team is not healthy, then it's
Mhm.
just going to multiply cracks and issues and divisions and silos across the whole rest of the company, which is why a lot of approaches, I think, to kind of like, we need to change the mindset, we need to transform this company, they fail because the leadership team haven't done the hard work themselves. um,
Yes.
but having said that, I think it is interesting to say, well, what is it that, it kind of works both ways. Sometimes leaders will go, well, actually, let's start with me, because I know that actually I'm having difficulty getting my team on board, or actually I'm not even sure I'm motivated by this mission, or whatever it is, right? Or I've got so many things going on, I don't know where to start. So that might be more of a strategy and focus issue. So it might start with them, and a limiting factor that we identify in their own leadership makeup, if you like, because we all have those. Or the issue might be more obviously demonstrated in the team. Oh, we're not working together. We're in silos. We're kind of we're all a bunch of high performers, but we don't actually come together with our business leader hat on to work on the overall business issues. We're working just on our functional issues, or there's some lack of trust in the team, whatever. So something in the team level might be the initial symptom that people
Yeah.
want to address. But then it takes a bit of time to really unpick it and to separate cause from effect. I kind of quite wary about models that propose a simple 5-step process, um, when it comes to teams, especially because it's all so interrelated.
Yes. Well, and they tend not to follow scripts really
Right.
well.
Exactly.
So there's some different dynamics. There's obviously commonalities, but there are different dynamics to each. So with this, how do you find those limiting factors? Like, what are some of the things that you do? And because there's dealing with it, but so you've got an organization of maybe thousands of people. How do you find these limiting factors and identify the one that's really the one that's making the impact or not making the impact that you're looking for? And then how do you sequence? So this is kind of a sequencing. It's an identification, and so that you can sequence question.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Because there might be lots of things that they need to take care of. Like,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there can be yeah, absolutely. So I think it would kind of depend on. It'll often depend on where the organization is, but I tend to find that you need to first of all make sure if you've got a large organization, I would really be focusing to say, okay, well, what is the capacity of the leadership team to actually process whatever issues are in the organization?
got it.
Because there's no point doing a massive diagnosis over, rolling it out across the whole organization and bringing all the issues up if that team can't deal with the issues once they're there.
Good point.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'd really say that, the first thing is you need to actually look at the team and say, how are we doing against these various aspects, right? Do we have a goal that we're all committed to? Do we operate effectively in terms of making decisions, in terms of defining roles and responsibilities, in terms of actually delivering on what we say? Do we have the internal trust and psychological safety? Are we learning as a team? Do we actually learn? Do we actually grow? Are we kind of, do we know where our next level is as a team? Are we kind of pushing ourselves and trying to find out what we don't know, those kind of things? And then also, how are we working with our stakeholders, right? So I love to, for example, to get stakeholders' views on the leadership team. So that might be the investors, it might be customers, it might be the reports of the people on the leadership team, because we can all believe all sorts of ideas that we have about how we are doing. When other people give us input, then we tend to see a bigger picture. So I would say, often for me, the first thing is to kind of look at that number one team and say, is it really, what journey is that team on to have more capacity to deal with the issues facing the organization? And that doesn't have to be a massively time-consuming thing. People don't have masses of time, but it's important to actually, again, focus in on what are the things that we want to do that are going to move us forward. So I think that's where I'd kind of start. And then the second part is the multiplication part. Is actually going, okay, how do we start to, now we're seeing how this team is up leveling. How are you as a part of that team? How are you going to take that and work with it with your team? So what's it that your team's going to need to change? There's a story from a very different field. There was a leader, a church leader of the biggest, kind of fastest growing church in the UK. This was many years ago, 20 years ago, I guess now. It was when he came into this church, he decided he was going to invest in kind of 8 key leaders. And especially in the UK, having a vicar, a chaplain, only really focusing on 8 people was a bit of a shocker, because normally they should be at the beck and call of the whole congregation. But he was like, yeah, but this is a big church. I can't possibly change so many people's lives. I can invest in a few people. I can't invest in multiple hundreds of people. So he said, I'm going to focus in on 8. I'm going to help them focus in on their people. And I'm going to, right? And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help them learn what I know and help them pass it on to their people. And so when the 9/11 attacks happened, I was watching it on TV and on the radio, and he said, "Oh, this is terrible. We have to go and pray." He he picked up the phone and called his like 8 leaders and said, guys, let's meet at the church, in half an hour to pray. This terrible thing is happening. So he kind of walked over to the church or whatever, and there were like 200 people there within half an hour.
Wow.
Because he'd kind of got this nervous system, right?
Yes.
It wasn't just him, this one leader with this big floppy kind of amoeba-like organization. He had built this kind of relational infrastructure that could respond. So there's suddenly a challenge the organization wanted to respond to. Called his 8 people, strong relationship with them. They were like, yeah, sure, absolutely, boom. But they also had those relationships with their 8 people or their 10 people or whatever, and so forth. And so he had this infrastructure. And he talked to a lot of CEOs. They don't feel they have anything like that. They feel that they are this. They have the title of chief executive, but how can they really move the organizational muscles?
Yes.
Necessarily, they can write some diktats and they can kind of impose things, but they don't necessarily have that degree of adaptability.
Yes.
And so that's kind of, I suppose, what again, trying to take that strategic approach, building that capability so that the whole organization can start to become more adaptable and responsive.
Yeah. Well, what a great example. And in organizations, that's what happens. Like we were talking about in the beginning about strategy, team puts together a strategy, and then the execution and lack of alignment causes a lack of failed execution, because they don't have the strong relationships. If they have a strong relationship at the beginning and they teach how to build strong relationships, then you have strong relationships all the way throughout the organization. And it's such a tight network. Again, it comes back to this whole idea of alignment that you talk about. So just as we wrap up, what are some of because I know you talk about shifts that we can make and how to, and you have multiple impact multipliers. And I know that on your website, maybe this is actually a good place to mention this. On your website, I saw that you have a free download. It's 18 questions. You actually have several things in your website, which I thought were really interesting for leaders to go and check out. This one in particular I picked out was 18 questions for you for your first 100 days in a new leadership role. So 18 questions to ask yourself. There's lots of questions you can ask yourself. What do I do, to get to calibrate and so forth and to get integrated? But these are 18 questions that you put together. And so for our listeners, go to the website is xquadrant.com. We'll make sure, of course, this is in the notes, but that's Richard's website, and get a copy of that. And there's a lot of great information on Richard's website that will unpack some of these impact multipliers. But just for here, before we wrap up, is give us a little bit of a taste of what else, like what are some of the things that they can expect, or some of the shifts that that you feel. We've talked about a number of them here, but something that maybe I haven't asked you that I don't know to ask that you feel is really important for our listeners to know.
Well, I suppose we talked about this kind of this freeing up time at the start, right? A little bit, and about this investing to work on these high value tasks. And I suppose often when I'm working with an executive or even with a team, one of the first things is often like, how do I create this margin to create this flywheel and get better at getting better, right? And so it's like a productivity question, but it's an executive level productivity question, right? Because it's not just about your own. It's not back to me and my model, right? It's about your leadership. You've got people with requests on your time, with requirements on your time. You're being dragged into all these kind of different projects. So it's a difficult situation, and it's not just that you don't need a productivity tip or an app to solve this. You need a different way of thinking. You need it's leadership in itself. And so I think one resource people might find helpful is I've got a short little email course called Freeing Yourself Up for Strategic Activity. And I find that's going to be a really helpful place to start, because it's what you want to do, right? You want to create this margin that allows you to repurpose your time for higher value activities. And that's kind of how you start to level up. And that's at xquadrant.com/go/productivity. And that could be a nice place. It's just like eight or so emails that where I try to really push your thinking and get you to think about productivity in a different way. And especially if you're somebody who goes, like, you don't understand my world. Like, I have all these people requiring my time. I have this, I have that. It's like, I'd love to have time, but I look at my diary, it's just not possible. Hopefully this would be for you, because actually I try to, play with your thinking a little bit, mess with your thinking to help you see how, some ways forward on that.
So you can step back you step back, one step back, let's say, to take 10 steps forward. And it's like you're building. I think of Paul Pilzer, who wrote the book Unlimited Wealth. And he was a brilliant mind, very much like you, where he kept moving forward and was like the youngest VP of Citibank at the age of 26. And he had this thing where he talked about building the pipeline. He uses this example of being on an island, and and some people are going with the water buckets, and they're trying to enlist other people's help to bring more water to the village, where somebody else just took the time to build the pipeline.
Right. Yeah.
And the other ones were like, why are you doing that? It's such a waste of time. Look at all the water we're bringing to the village. But once the pipeline was built, then he had that steady flow.
Yeah.
And there's so much to that in terms of leading differently, especially in this kind of age where business is moving so fast. There's a point where you just can't go any faster. I mean, it's like racing, like Formula One. You're in Europe, right? So, my family, we love the races. We used to always watch the Formula One. There's a point where it's not about going faster. It's about getting into the pit stop, being more efficient. It's about suspension. It's about, traction. It's different things to get in the corners and in and out quickly and so forth. So it's like these finer little distinctions. And as the world is moving so much faster, that's why this conversation and what you do is so important. It's not about just doing more, because at some point you're not going to be able to do more.
Exactly. I mean, to be honest, I think the
in the
secret
same
of my
old way.
success is it's strategic laziness. I think my wife, finds it hilarious.
There you
But
go.
it's strategic laziness. In other words, like, how do I get the result without having to work twice as hard? Because as you say, we've only got a limited number of hours in the day.
Yes.
I love to say there is a ceiling of complexity, and most people try to hit it just by work and by effort.
Yes.
And you max out very quickly, and you just end up running yourself ragged. The other approach is to change gear, right? Is to level up, do different things, work on different problems that actually put you into a different game. You say, it's like, I'm building a pipeline. I'm not running backwards and forwards trying to bring water anymore.
Yes.
And one of my little phrases is, you can't change gear when you have your foot stuck on the accelerator.
I love that. That's so good.
People, that's what they do. Most people are that they have got no margin in their lives or in their work. They're probably running on negative margins, so they've got nothing to invest in this next level of activity.
Yes. Yeah, and there's so many CEOs and leaders at different levels that find themselves in a position where they're just not having fun, and it's all about work, and they're sacrificing their family. And I know that you have a family, your wife, your kids, and we didn't get a chance to talk too much about that, but your love for the electric guitar and spicy food. And I know you're also you've also been a pastor, and there's just so much to your life, which makes it rich. And so it's more than just work. And so, when we try to work harder and harder and harder, I know this for myself, you get to the point where, hey, there's nobody that can outwork me. And where's my quality of life and all of that? Because at the end of the day, like you said on your epitaph, are you, is this what you want to be known for? Is this what you want to be remembered for? That you made good models, or that you were really efficient, with getting things done. And there's a lot more to life than that.
Yeah, and perhaps just on that, it might be a nice way to end up is, sometimes I've worked with leaders who have actually left corporate, and perhaps they've made all the money they need to make or whatever, and they're like, what do I do next? And often they can settle for dabbling. Just go and do a bit of that, play a bit of golf, be on a board, perhaps do a little bit of consulting here and there, which is fine. But normally behind that is this fear that if I really put myself into another project, I'm going to have the same impact on my health and my relationships that I did in my corporate life. I can't do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. So I
Yes.
love to help people think, well, what's a 25-year mission for you now? You know, you might have be 55 or 65, or I don't know what it is. You've still got 25 years or plus of impact available to you, and it could be exponentially greater than anything you've achieved to date. You can build on all your experience, your skills, your resources, your relationships. But wouldn't it be amazing to do that without this impact on your health, on your relationships, that you perhaps have
Yes.
seen before? And so that's often where people get this kind of, that'd be interesting. Perhaps that would be exciting, right? That's why I call my company X Quadrant, really. And there's various reasons. We haven't got time to go into it now, but one of the reasons is this idea of something which seems to be an either/or choice. You bend those round into two different axes and say, how can I be at the intersection of both of those axes? How can
Oh,
I have more impact than ever before, and have a better life, for example.
yeah. I like
Have more
that.
margin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in quality of life, I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. I mean, we're here to learn and to grow, in my opinion, and to make make an impact, like you're talking about. But it's making an impact in a positive way, impact on relationships, an impact on the world. I believe that every single person has tremendous value and unique value to bring to the world. That's why you're here, and that's why I'm here, and that's why everybody's here. And so that's what we're called to do, is to bring that value to the world. And if all we're doing is working and trying to figure out how do we make more money, get more done, work longer hours, hack our way to success in that way, we miss the richness of it. We miss the point in many times. So this has been really, really good. Richard, thank you so much.
It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
so
It's been a
much
very
for
good
hanging out.
conversation. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think we could, I mean, I had a whole bunch of questions just in case I wanted to kind of, in terms of what to talk about. And we covered so much richness here. We didn't even get to half of them. So I know we could probably talk for hours, but I would encourage our listeners to go to xquadrant.com and check out Richard's resources. He's already mentioned one of them here. I mentioned another one. There's also his podcast, Impact Multiplier CEO. All of this the links will be in the show notes at theleadersoftransformation.com. And there's a neat feature actually on our website, if you haven't been to the website, where there is a search field where you can type in Richard, and every episode by somebody named Richard will be there, because of course we've had hundreds of episodes, but you'll be easily able to find Richard's episode and the show notes, and we do some transcript highlights there as well for you, so you can do a quick scan. So highly encourage you to check that out and connect with Richard, learn more what he's doing. We'll also make sure there's a link to his LinkedIn profile. And that's actually where we met, is through LinkedIn. So I love, and this is about quality relationships. It's not just about reaching out to every single person that you find on LinkedIn, but it's having quality conversations. And he reached out, and here we are. And so it's a testament to making an impact very efficiently by just having being strategic about the conversations you have. So again, Richard, I really appreciate you being here. To our listeners, thank you for being here. You're the reason why we do this podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please leave us a rating and review, follow, subscribe on your favorite channel, and share it. Share it with a friend. If you've got a leader who is working really hard and maybe just burning themselves out and needs to figure out a different way to approach growth in their company and in their life, then have them listen to this, and hopefully it'll encourage them. So again, we thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.